Sector 19 had long since slipped into its hollow night rhythm, the kind where even the hum of the air vents sounded cautious. Jonas Morrell sat at his console in the dim glow of pale blue monitors, lines of numbers sliding down columns with mechanical indifference. Noise audits, population logs, water cycles details that no one but him ever cared to read. It was the kind of work that made a man invisible, and invisibility was exactly what he had chosen after years of dragging blood-soaked bodies out of collapsed habitats and fire-scorched domes. Quiet was the only thing he could still control. When the system finally cleared his queue, he lingered anyway, rubbing the scar across his left knuckle, tracing the familiar ridge of old field injury. The silence pressed close, steady, predictable. He shut down the console, pulled his jacket from the back of the chair, and rose. His boots scuffed against the polymer floor as he moved toward the door, until a sound cut through the quiet. A knock. One sharp, solitary rap. A pause. Two more. Jonas froze. No one knocked here. Maintenance buzzed. Inspectors keyed in codes. Neighbors pretended each other didn't exist. He glanced at the door cam, pulse steady by habit, eyes narrowing as the image resolved. A figure stood barefoot on the white tile, motionless, dripping. He keyed the door open. The woman swayed on the threshold, half wrapped in shredded translucent plastic that clung to her chest and hips like discarded packaging. Her calves were caked in dried mud, her hair long and black and tangled into ropes that stuck against her jaw. Under the grime, her skin was a dull green, faintly luminous in places where bioluminescent specks pulsed weakly along her collarbones. Her pale eyes narrowed against the corridor lights, slit pupils adjusting like an animal forced into a cage of brightness. She steadied herself with visible effort and spoke through a halting, mechanical accent. "I only have 3 credits. Please, let me shower at your home." Jonas's body locked into stillness. His mind, though, ran the old calculations. Lips cracked, dehydration. Right leg favoring possible injury. Breathing shallow but controlled. Tremor in the fingers. Defensive posture, but not aggressive. Not violent. His training whispered the rest. No unauthorized entrance. Every door leaves a log. She didn't belong here. If he let her in, the risk would not vanish. It would multiply. He thought of walking past her, pretending she was another shadow of the underlevels, forgotten like so many others. It would be easier. That's how it had been for years. Easy silence. But the way she stood, proud spine trembling, eyes refusing to plead, struck something in him that had survived even after all the screens and wreckage. Jonas stepped back from the doorway. Her shoulders rose once, a sharp breath of disbelief, before she crossed the threshold. The door sealed behind her with a hiss. She flinched at the sound, scanning the corners of the room like an animal learning the shape of a cage. He didn't move closer. He only gestured down the short hall. "Bathroom," he said quietly. "Water's hot." Soap on the middle shelf. Shampoo on the top. She glanced at his hands, cautious, measuring, and gave a single nod. The strength in it was brittle, but real. Jonas watched her pass, droplets of dirty water marking her path on the white tile. When the door closed behind her, he stood in the kitchen, hands braced against the counter. A moment later, the shower hissed to life, hot water rushing. The sound pierced straight through the controlled silence he had built around himself. It wasn't just noise. It was intrusion, disruption, life. He tried to anchor himself in the smell of furlan seed coffee brewing, but his eyes kept drifting to the bathroom door, to the steam curling from its edge. Protocol said he had already failed. Instinct said otherwise. He didn't know which part of him would win in the end. But the choice had been made. The dirty alien woman had asked. He had opened the door. And now, for the first time in years, Jonas Morrill wasn't alone. Steam curled from the bathroom doorway, threading into the sterile air like smoke in a chamber that had never known warmth. Jonas stood at the counter, coffee cooling in his hand, listening to the steady hiss of water. The sound scraped against the quiet he had taught himself to live inside, and yet he couldn't move away from it. Each second it continued was proof that someone else occupied this space, someone who shouldn't. The water shut off. Silence pooled thick across the room. Jonas set his cup down without drinking, jaw tight. He heard the faint scrape of fabric, the shift of bare feet against tile. Then the door opened. She stepped out wrapped in one of his towels, the fabric clinging damp to her body. Clean now, her skin was a deeper green, smooth and alive, faint luminescent specks glowing softly at her shoulders. Her long black hair hung wet and heavy, trailing water down her collarbones. She looked taller without the grime disguising her, her eyes sharper, pale green slit pupils narrowing on him. Jonas didn't move. He pointed at the clothes he had laid out, an old slate shirt and drawcord pants folded neatly on the dresser. She glanced at the bundle, then at him. No words, just a silent calculation. After a moment, she stepped back into the bathroom, closing the door. Jonas exhaled slowly, as if a weight had settled somewhere deeper than his chest. He reached for a ration packet, tore it open, and set it to heat. The earthy scent of Viren root stew filled the kitchen, grounding him in the small, human act of preparing food. He hated how badly his hands shook when he set the spoon beside the bowl. The bathroom door opened again. She emerged clothed, the shirt draping long over her narrow frame, the pants tied twice around her waist. Oversized, but they covered her. She carried herself straighter now, balanced where she had swayed before Jonas gestured at the table. Eat. She hesitated only a heartbeat, and lowered herself into the chair. She picked up the spoon and ate with fast, practiced precision, no wasted motion, no noise. Hunger had stripped her hesitation, but not her control. When the bowl was empty, she set the spoon down carefully, centering it on the table. Name, Jonas said, his voice steady, clipped. Her eyes lifted to his. Arena. The word came softer now, the translator lag gone, the consonants rounded by her own mouth. He nodded once. Jonas. Arena gave a small incline of her head. Not thanks. Not yet. Just recognition. She wiped at her damp hair with the towel he passed her, fingers working through knots with meticulous patience. Jonas watched her movements, calculated, cautious. A woman who had spent too long proving she took up as little space as possible. You live alone, she said, double quotes, yes. What do you do? Noise audits. Population checks. I find problems before they become disasters. Her gaze swept the silent monitors, the single chair, the orderly counters. You don't look like someone who waits for disasters. I used to go to them. His voice carried the weight of years he didn't want to unpack. Now I don't. She twisted the towel in her lap, hands trembling. She pressed them flat to her thighs to stop the shake. Jonas opened a drawer, pulled out an access card, and set it on the table between them. Temporary code. Locks from inside. If anyone knocks, don't open. If you need me, press the green square twice. Her eyes flicked from the card to his face. You're leaving? I work nights. Arena studied him, jaw tight, calculation flickering across her eyes again. Whether this was safety, whether this was a trap. Jonas didn't move, didn't try to convince her. Finally, she reached for the card. Her fingers brushed his, warm and lingering a fraction longer than necessary. A wordless truce. The couch is yours, Jonas said. Sheets are clean. She nodded once. Pride straightening her spine, even while exhaustion bent it. She carried the towel to the rack and hung it neatly. precise as if marking her presence in the space without asking permission. Jonas dimmed the lights. Outside, rain whispered against the dome far above, a sound like static on glass. For the first time in years, the silence inside his apartment didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. And as Jonas sat back at his terminal, pretending to review dark screens, he caught her reflection in the glass. Arena curled on the couch, blanket to her waist, eyes open, watching the room. Slowly, her breathing deepened. Slowly, her eyes closed. Jonas stayed awake, watching the door. Not for intruders. Not for threat. Just to make sure she stayed steady until morning. Jonas woke before the dome's artificial dawn. As he always did, his body tuned to the faint hum of the system reboot that rippled through Sector 19 each cycle. He sat up slowly, back stiff from the floor where he had chosen to sleep. Eyes already sweeping the room for details. Vent rhythm steady, temperature unchanged, faint soap smell lingering in the air. Arena lay curled on the couch beneath the blanket. Her breathing was deeper now, the shallow guarded rhythm replaced by something steadier, almost peaceful. One bare foot had slipped out from the cover, pale green against the slate fabric. Her long black hair, half dry, fanned in tangles across her arm and the pillow. She looked smaller in sleep, but not fragile, more like a soldier resting after a siege. Jonas rose carefully and crossed to the kitchen. He set water to boil, rationed bread on the counter. The smell of heat and grain softened the sterile air, made it feel less like a compartment, and more like somewhere people might live. He caught himself glancing at her reflection in the dark window, at the slow rise and fall of her shoulders, at the way the blanket clung to her form. The water whistled softly. Jonas poured tea into 2 mugs. That was when the blanket shifted. Arena stirred, blinking against the faint light. Her eyes snapped to him at once, quick, sharp, assessing, alert. Then they softened, if only slightly. "You stayed," she murmured, voice rough from sleep. "Yes," Jonas said. "You didn't lock me in." "No." She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Her caution was different now. Not fear, something closer to wary curiosity, like she was testing which rules applied here. Jonas pushed a mug of tea across the table. "Bread, too," he said. She hesitated, then rose. Her movements were slower, but steady. No stumble. She sat opposite him, cupping the mug in both hands. Steam drifted around her face, softening the hard lines exhaustion had carved into her features. She sipped once, eyes flicking to the counters, the monitors, the towels folded neatly. Jonas let the silence stretch before asking, "Is anyone looking for you?" Her gaze snapped sharp again, defensive. "No. Anyone who might say you're missing? They stopped counting me 3 years ago." He absorbed that without flinching. "You lived under the overpasses." "Yes." She set the mug down. "Since I was 17. Sector 23 first. Then 19. Her voice carried no shame, only flat recital. "Service cast regex aren't allowed housing credits. They said my markers failed the bond screen. No contracts, no permits, no rations. That's why you won't find me on your lists." Jonas nodded once. "You're not supposed to exist." Her lips curled in something that might have been a bitter smile. "But the city keeps making new places to hide." They sat in the quiet for a long moment. Then she lifted her eyes. "Why did you let me in?" Jonas hadn't planned for the question. His answer rose from somewhere deeper than thought. "Because no one else would." She studied him, expression unreadable. For the first time since entering his apartment, something in her face soft, not thanks, not relief, but recognition. Jonas pulled a small packet from the drawer and set it on the table. A comb, a toothbrush, a sealed cloth. "Use these. They're yours now." Arena looked at them as if they were glass relics. Her fingers brushed the comb, hesitant, then lifted it as though testing whether it was real. "You didn't ask what I'll pay," she said slowly. "I don't want payment." Her eyes narrowed. "Then what order?" Jonas leaned back in his chair, steady as ever. "The world outside is chaos. This apartment isn't." Arena tilted her head, considering. Then she rose, walked to the mirror beside the bathroom, and began combing her wet hair. Each stroke was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. The soft rasp of teeth through strands filled the silence with something new, not emptiness, but life. Jonas watched, not intruding. And when she returned, setting the comb neatly on the counter, as though claiming the space, he realized something had shifted. The apartment no longer looked like a system under his control. It looked like a place occupied by two people, each deciding not to vanish. For the first time in years, Jonas didn't think of how quickly the silence might return. He thought of how to make it last. The dome above Tarson Vire bled pale orange light into Sector 19 as Jonas sat at his terminal, the screens glowing faint against his face. He scrolled through noise logs, water usage tallies, vent cycles. It was meant to be routine. It wasn't. A variance marker blinked on the corner of the display settle, almost invisible, but there. Water consumption anomaly, flagged for inspection within 3 cycles. Jonas stared at the line until it blurred. He didn't need the system to tell him what had caused it. Her first shower. He shut the screen off with one decisive motion. When he turned, Arena was standing barefoot at the counter, sleeves rolled, carefully washing their 2 mugs. The sight of her in that simple act, steady hands moving in warm water, hit him harder than the warning on the monitor. For a moment he considered not telling her. Let her rest in the fragile calm she had only just begun to trust. But she would see it in his face sooner or later. "Arena." His voice was quiet, but iron. She looked up instantly, eyes sharp. "What?" They flagged the water. "Maintenance sweep is coming." Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't freeze. She set the mug carefully in the rack. "Then I leave." "No." The word came sharper than he intended. He stepped closer, steady, controlled. "If you leave now, they'll mark you before you reach the lift. Running is what they expect. It confirms the anomaly. If you stay, if you look like you belong, they don't see you." Her jaw worked. "You want me visible?" "Not visible. Boring." She tilted her head, slit pupils narrowing. "I don't know how to look boring." Jonas folded his arms. "Then I'll teach you." The hours that followed fell into a rhythm neither of them had expected. Jonas laid out steps with the precision of an instructor. A toothbrush left by the sink, a comb set neatly beside his own, a towel hanging on the same rack. "Small markers," he said. "Proof someone lives here. People don't notice details they think they already understand." Arena obeyed at first with stiff, suspicious hands. But as she placed each item, her expression shifted. Not fear, not even compliance, something else. The fragile weight of permanence pressing against her ribs. When he handed her a ration knife to slice varan root, she worked in silence, movements precise. He watched her shoulders slowly lower, her body angling less like prey and more like someone inhabiting space. They ate together at the narrow counter, knees brushing once by accident. Neither moved away. After the meal, Jonas pulled up the dummy maintenance form on his console, fingers gliding across the keys as he filed a false report. Filter buildup, scheduled replacement. He narrated as he worked. Inspectors don't care about faces. They care about patterns. I give them one, they leave. Arena stood behind him, close enough that he felt the faint glow of her skin warming the back of his neck. Her voice was quiet, steady. "And me? What pattern am I?" Jonas paused, his fingers stilled above the console. Then he turned to her, meeting her pale green eyes. "You're my partner." Sector 23. The word left him before he had fully decided to say it. It hung in the air between them, heavier than any log entry. Irina's lips parted slightly, eyes searching his face. For a heartbeat, her glow flickered, then steadied. She didn't argue. She didn't deny. She only looked at him as if measuring whether he believed his own words. Jonas forced himself to hold her gaze, his expression flat but unflinching. When they come, you'll sit at the table. You'll read a datapad. You won't look up unless they speak. If they do, you'll answer with that name. Nothing more. Irina nodded once, but her voice betrayed her. And if they see through it, then they'll see what I tell them to. She breathed out slowly, not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief. Then she crossed the room, took the comb from the counter, and began braiding her hair in the reflection of the window. Each movement was deliberate, ritualistic, as though she were preparing for battle disguised as normal life. Jonas watched her reflection, her profile illuminated in the dome's faint blue glow. She looked calmer than he had expected, calmer than he felt. For the first time since she had knocked on his door, Jonas realized the silence in the apartment was no longer empty. It was loaded, charged, and alive. Mid-cycle descended with the steady dim of the dome lights, the artificial day bleeding into a softer, clinical dusk. Jonas's apartment was too quiet. Every vent hum and water dripped sharply against the silence. He stood at the counter, aligning plates with precise care, though he knew they would not be used. His pulse was steady out of habit, but beneath it his body felt coiled. Waiting for the inevitable knock. Irina sat at the table in the slate shirt, hair braided tight, a datapad propped casually in her hands. Her legs were crossed, shoulders loose, posture rehearsed into normalcy. She looked like someone passing time, waiting for nothing in particular. But Jonas could see the minute tremors in her fingers as she scrolled, the flicker of her eyes toward the door before she corrected herself. "You're ready," Jonas said, voice low. "I don't feel ready." "That's how you know you are." Before she could answer, the corridor cam outside crackled faintly. Jonas stiffened, gaze snapping to the door panel. Footsteps followed synchronized rubber saws, too even to be neighbors, inspectors. The chime sounded. Jonas opened the door without hesitation. Two figures in gray maintenance suits stood there, scan wands slung at their sides, expressions neutral. One raised a badge. "Variance check." Jonas stepped back. "Come in." They moved as a unit, clinical and efficient. The older one knelt by the sink, sweeping the restrictor with a wand that clicked softly. The younger scanned the vent grates, eyes flicking between his readout and the pale blue glow of the dome outside the window. Neither spoke to Jonas beyond clipped acknowledgments. Irina didn't look up. She tapped the datapad idly, one finger moving in rhythm. Her body was still, her breathing calm. To anyone else, she was another resident passing time. To Jonas, she was a coil of tension held just short of breaking. The younger inspector's gaze flicked her way. For an instant, Jonas's chest went tight. But the man's eyes moved on, noting nothing, as if she were part of the furniture. "Resident guest?" the elder asked, without glancing up from his wand. "Rena," Jonas said evenly. "Sector 23, temporary, filed last night." The inspector hummed acknowledgement, already returning to his screen. The wand beeped twice. "Filter buildup, flushed, no anomaly," the younger echoed, marking a line on his pad. They packed their scanners in a synchronized motion, turned, and left without another word. The door hissed closed, sealing the apartment again. Irina exhaled sharp and fast, setting the datapad down on the table. Her hands trembled once, then steadied as she forced them flat against her thighs. Jonas keyed the lock and turned toward her. She was staring at him, pupils wide, glow at her collarbones pulsing quick. "They believed it," she said, almost incredulous. They saw what I told them to see. Jonas's voice was calm, but something inside him eased, a knot uncoiling in his chest. Arena stood slowly. She stepped closer than she had ever dared. He could see the faint wet shine at the corner of her eyes, though her face stayed composed. You could have told them I was nothing. Her voice was low, almost trembling. But you didn't. Jonas met her gaze without flinching. You're not nothing. For a long moment she didn't move. Then, with deliberate control, she pressed her forehead to his chest, just once, brief and silent. Her skin was warm, her breath shaky. When she stepped back, her eyes were steady again, glowing faint in the dim apartment. This place is mine, too, she said quietly. Jonas didn't correct her, because for the first time, it was true. The next cycle dawned pale and hollow, a dome above Sector 19, humming through its artificial reboot. Jonas sat at the table, with a mug cooling in his hands, staring at the maintenance docket flickering across his terminal. The sweep report was already archived, case closed, no variance detected. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it left him staring into a space he hadn't prepared for. Relief. Arena moved quietly around the room, barefoot, her braid uncoiling into loose strands that fell over her shoulders. She had taken to wiping the counters in the mornings, precise movements that made the sterile surfaces gleam. Each small act left an imprint on the apartment, traces of her where once there had been only order. Her towel hung beside his. Her comb sat on the counter. Her toothbrush waited by the sink. The evidence of her existence was no longer hidden. It was part of the pattern. Jonas's eyes lingered on her reflection in the window. She caught him watching. What now? She asked softly. Now, Jonas said, we make it real. She frowned, crossing to the table. Real? On the logs, he explained. Registry of residence. Not just camouflage. Permanent. Her breath caught, just audible. She stared at him, expression unreadable. If they know I exist, they could take it back. Jonas shook his head. If they know you exist, they can't pretend you never did. For the first time since he had met her, Arena looked unsure, not guarded, uncertain. Her fingers tightened on the back of the chair, the faint glow at her collarbones pulsing quick. And if I leave one day? She asked, voice low. Then the record stays, Jonas said. His tone was steady, final. They won't be able to say you are nothing. Arena's lips parted as if to argue, but the words never came. Instead she asked, quieter, almost a whisper, do you want me here because I fit your pattern? Or because you want me? Jonas set the mug down and stood, crossing the space between them. He crouched slightly, meeting her pale eyes head-on. His hand found her knee, grounding, warm, unflinching. Because I want you, he said. The pattern can burn. For a moment her breath hitched, pupils narrowing to slits in surprise. Then her shoulders eased, a faint tremor running out of her body. She laid her hand over his, firm, certain, then make it real. Later that morning, they walked the long white corridor together. No rush, no fear. Arena wore the slate shirt tucked neatly into the drawcord pants, her ceremonial thread tied smooth at her waist. Her hair was brushed loose, heavy down her back. She didn't look like someone stealing space anymore. She looked like she belonged to it, dot at the registry console on the ground floor. Jonas unlocked the panel with his clearance key. The screen glowed pale blue, waiting. He typed his name, then hers. He slid a thin plastic tag into the row beside his own. Arena stood silent, staring at it. Then she reached out, pressed her thumb against the tag until it clicked into place with a clean, permanent sound. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. She only said, steady and certain, "That's my name." Jonas stood close behind her, close enough for her to feel his warmth at her back. He gave a single nod. It is. When they walked back to the apartment, the silence between them wasn't sharp or empty. It was shared, alive, the kind that didn't need words to prove it existed. Arena hung her towel beside his without hesitation. She set her comb back on the counter, her toothbrush by the sink. She moved through the space with quiet assurance, no longer careful like a guest. Jonas watched her cross to the window and stand framed in the dome's blue glow, her reflection clear and solid. For the first time since he had opened that door, she wasn't a shadow. She was part of the pattern. And Jonas knew with bone-deep certainty that he didn't want the silence without her ever again. Several days passed, but the rhythm of the city outside seemed irrelevant now. Drone lanes flickered above the dome. Lifts whispered up and down the skeletal shafts of Sector 19. Vents exhaled their measured breath. All of it went on without Jonas, without Arena. Inside his apartment, time had slowed into something smaller, warmer, more deliberate. She hummed sometimes, faint melodies, while wiping down the counters or combing out her hair. Low, untrained tunes that wove themselves through the sterile air until it no longer felt sterile. Her things once tokens meant to camouflage had spread. A thread of fabric draped across the chair. A folded shirt in the drawer beside his. The towel she always hung with precision next to his own. For the first time in years, Jonas realized he hadn't checked the locks, hadn't walked the perimeter of his own room to prove it was secure. One evening he stood at the counter pouring coffee, arms folded, watching her framed in the dome light by the window. She was barefoot, wearing the slate shirt, the faint specks along her collarbones pulsing slow and calm. When she turned, catching his gaze, her lips curved faintly. "You're staring," she said. "I know. Do you like it?" She gestured at herself, at this version of her. Clean. Present. Visible. Jonas set the mug down and crossed to her, resting a hand at her waist. "Yes, I like this one." She leaned her forehead to his chest for a moment, exhaling against him. "I want to be clean all the way. Not just surface. Not just safe. Clean." His voice stayed low, steady. "And come with me." Steam soon curled through the bathroom, the tub filling with warm water. Arena stepped into it slowly, her skin shimmering as the glow in her body brightened with heat. Jonas knelt beside her, dipped a cloth, and began to wash her shoulders, arms, spine, each stroke deliberate, reverent. She breathed deeper, eyes half closed, letting him peel the last grime of survival away. "You're careful," she whispered. "I know how to handle fragile things." "I'm not fragile." "No, you're not." Something shifted then, attention snapping not in fear but in desire. She caught his jaw with wet fingers and kissed him, urgent, certain, pulling him into the water with her. The tub overflowed, warm streams spilling onto tile as their bodies pressed together, hunger breaking the walls of restraint he had built around himself. He didn't resist. He didn't want to. Later, tangled in damp sheets, silence finally fell again, but not the cold emptiness Jonas had once chosen. It was the silence of two people breathing the same rhythm, no longer strangers, no longer pretending to belong. In the cycles that followed, they moved together through routines that were no longer camouflage. Breakfast shared at the counter. Dishes washed in companionable quiet. Her towel hung beside his, not as a disguise but as truth. The registry had made her official. Their closeness had made her real. One morning, as the dome's light rose, Jonas woke to her head resting on his chest, her arm draped across him with quiet, unconscious trust. Her bioluminescent specks glowed steady against his skin, no longer flickering with stress. She blinked awake slowly, slick pupils narrowing and softening when they found him. "You didn't leave," she murmured. "You didn't either," he said. Her lips curved faintly, but her eyes stayed serious. "Do I get to be something else now? Not forgotten. Not erased. Something real. Jonas drew her closer, hand firm at her waist. You already are. Arena closed her eyes, her forehead pressing into him. And for the first time since that desperate knock on his door, the silence inside the apartment wasn't a shield. It was home.